a cylinder, we can call it a combustion chamber. There's another word that the English use, flue. That's not the coughs and colds flue, F-L-U-E. And that is a name for a pipe that's got heat inside it. Why? Because many years ago, in good old England, the way they got heat into the house, because it gets effing cold in Britain, they make a fire and they allow the hot gases to escape outside. Chimneys, stacks, you know the chimney stack on your boiler. That's also called a flue. What does a flue mean in English? It's a pipe with heat inside it. That's all. Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry to disturb you. Since you spoke about England, the UK, I once read somewhere about the history of the boiler. Is it true that it was invented in the UK and then it went on and came here to South Africa, especially the history of John Thompson?
Okay, I'll give you that story.
Yeah.
I'll give you that story.
Please elaborate.
You're absolutely right. They were designed and they were built and they were invented in the United Kingdom or the British Isles or the UK, whichever you want to call it, Britain, about 350, 400 years ago. And what's very interesting is the design of boilers then is practically still the same as boilers now. We have not been able to, with all our knowledge and expertise, we have not been able to improve on the design of boilers. Can you believe that? So the boilers generally as they were then are exactly as they were now. You'll get many boilers at the moment that are over 100 years old, that are still operating in Cape Town. I know of those in Cape Town, in South Africa right now. So what they used to do is that they had two designs. They had what we call a horizontal design, and then there was a vertical design. I'll come to you with the difference in a minute. Well, no, let's do it now. Is that the fire that I've burned inside inside this pipe, the name I give to it, the name I like to give to it, the name I'm hoping that you will adopt, is called first pass. What does that mean? It means that I've got a pipe, that here at the beginning of the pipe I'm making heat, and I need the heat to travel to the end of that pipe. In other words, from one side to the other side, which means the heat passes through, because the pipes are completely surrounded on the outside with water. So the heat passes through the water once, it then turns in a box and comes back through a whole lot of smaller pipes. I'll explain to you why that is so just now. So the whole lot of pass of these little pipes, the whole group of them as they come here, the heat now passes through the water for the second time. And then it turns and it's connected to a whole lot of smaller pipes, and it's now the heat is passing through the water for the third time. Okay, that is why we call this a three-pass boiler. Now, it depends on the size of the boiler required, because there are some boilers that will only have a two-pass system, and therefore the third pass won't exist. And the chimney stack, instead of being at the back of the boiler, will be at the front of the boiler. So if you come into a boiler room and you find the chimney right in the front of the boiler house, not at the back of the boiler, you've got a pretty good idea that's going to be a two-pass boiler. Why? What's the difference? The difference is you need a certain amount of heating surface. I need a certain amount of surface to be heated inside, to be hot inside, to generate that water through into my boiler to make the water boil. And the more kilograms of steam I need, the more pipes I'm going to need, or the greater will be the heating surface. Does that make sense? So the bigger my boiler is, either the more tubes I'm using, or the more passes I'm going to use. Maximum is 3. So you get a 2-pass boiler and a 3-pass boiler is normally the standard design. They have slightly modernized it with what we now call it, nowadays we would call a reverse pass boiler. But all that basically means is instead of having one big pipe and a whole lot of small ones, what they say is that we'll make this one massive pipe, and we'll have a burner burning inside here, and then the heat will deflect off the back door, the back door of the boiler, and deflect the heat back on the outside of the tubes, still inside the tube, but closer to the metal. And then it will then turn and go through another set of tubes, which goes to the back of the boiler, and that's why some boilers will have a chimney stack at the back, but we won't call it a 3-pass boiler, we call it a reverse pass boiler. Now that's just a little bit of design on the piping that's on the inside. Let's stick to the more basic design, the more common design. Your boiler, I will pretty much put my head on a block to say to you, it's a 3-pass boiler. What's the make of your boiler? What is the make of boiler that you're using? What's the make of boiler? John Thompson. Are you from this branch or are you from another? The other, all right.
Yes, John Thompson. I was asking also another question. Why is it called AfriPack? And I saw somewhere else they say it's a Europack and also a Micropack. Can you please distinguish between the three?
Okay. What's the difference between the AfriPack? The AfriPack is a boiler that's similar to this because we're going to use a coal as a fuel. Does that make sense?
The AfriPack, you're using coal.
Coal. AfriPack uses coal.
Coal fired.
Yeah. But you can find boilers that they have removed the stokers and put burners on it. So you can even have an AfriPack with a diesel or LPG or gas burner on it. The Europacks are generally the newer version of the AfriPack. In other words, it's still an AfriPack, but it's a new model, and now they call that a Europack. Okay? And then you get the ReadyPack and the ConPack. The ReadyPack and ConPack have got burners on them. They don't use coal as a fuel. So they use liquid fuels like LPG, oil, gas, light oil, diesel, paraffin. Those are the types of fluids on it. So they give them different names like ReadyPacks and ConPacks and so on. That are only the names within the John Thompson boiler range. But John Thompson is only one of about 130 different makes of boilers. In South Africa now, we've got a very popular brand that is around. It's called the Cochrane. Cochrane is a Scottish boiler made in Scotland in a little town called Annan. And they are very, very, very similar to the John Thompson range. Do you want to know why it's very similar to the John Thompson range? It's because the owner of Cochrane, who started building boilers in Scotland, had 2 sons. And these 2 sons didn't like each other. And they were going to take over Daddy's business of Cochrane boilers. So they realized between themselves that they disliked each other so much they would never be able to work together. So the father said to these boys, once you've understood what's going on, he says, now, bugger off out of Scotland. Get away from me. Go into the world and go and make your boilers if you want to. The one brother came to Cape Town, Bellville South, and he started the boiler factory there. It was first called Cape Fabricated Metals. I'm going back into the 20s and the 30s of 1920s, 1930s. And around about the 1950s, my father was approached in Holland to come to South Africa to help with the building of the John Thompson boilers. So my father came to South Africa with his wife, my mom, with my eldest sister, and me, and we came and arrived in Cape Town in 1952. And what we did was then my father went to work for this company called Cape Fabricated Metals. It was run by one of the sons who was also a John Thompson. The other son moved to Rhodesia. He settled in Rhodesia, which later, as we know, became Zimbabwe. And there he started a company, and he named it after his father, after the original company in England, in Scotland, called Cochrane, and he called it Cochrane Rhodesia. Later on it became Cochrane Zimbabwe. It then changed from Cochrane Zimbabwe to John Thompson Zimbabwe. So you get the original manufacturer, which was old man John Thompson, his sons copied the designs of the boilers that his father built, and they started building them in Africa. One in South Africa and one in Zimbabwe. And that's why we've got boilers that are coming out of Zimbabwe today, called John Thompson or Cochrane Zimbabwe. In Johannesburg, there's a company, the company that I'm representing today, Steam Generation. They import the Cochrane boiler directly from the old man's descendants in Scotland. And those boilers come to South Africa and they are sold under the brand name of Cochrane. But they're all basically pretty much the same design. In fact, there are lots of John Thompson and Cochrane parts, especially on the stokers, that you can take off one Cochrane boiler and you can put it straight onto a John Thompson, or a John Thompson straight onto a Cochrane. So that is how boilers generally came out. There was another company also from the UK called Cradley, and they brought out boilers, and they brought out vertical boilers. The original Cochranes, by the way, were also original vertical boilers. And they made them those days, but they didn't have what we call, and what you're going to know as, inside these tubes is the heat. Inside these other tubes is the heat. So we call those tubes, because the heat is inside and the water is outside, we will call them fire tubes. The tube has got fire inside. On the vertical boiler, they've got it the other way around. They've got water inside the tubes, and then they've got a fire that is burning around the outside of it. So the fire on the outside heats up the tube, then heats up the water, and the water that's inside the tubes eventually comes to the top, and by that time it reaches 100 degrees Celsius and releases in the top tube, it releases the steam into the top area. So that's a little bit of a history on boilers, which is interesting. I love the fact that they have been able to change the design. Or they have been able to improve on the design. So that's a good point.
Yeah, you are agree with the changing of the design, because the vertical ones and the horizontal ones, they don't have a stoker, because you have to open it and then shine.
Well, they actually do have a stoker. It's actually called a Bigwood. It's a Bigwood gearbox. It's actually a pipe with coal in it that goes under the ground and then pushes up inside the boiler in between a lot of cast iron tuyeres, and the coal comes out, and then there's two air ducts that will add air to it, primary and secondary air, so it burns on the inside of it. It's called a retort. The coal has got a little hopper on the outside, and you put coal into the hopper, and then there's a screw inside a pipe that pushes the coal underneath the ground, and then up inside the boiler into this retort, into what we call it's a 4BG or a 5BG Bigwood box. I used to build those boxes as a child. I used to make them and sell them and maintain them when I was 15, 16 years old. That was one part and parcel of my job when it was. Now the vertical fired boilers, the small ones, are not very efficient in terms of how many kilograms of steam per hour it could produce. But once you took a boiler, and a vertical boiler, water tube, and you start building it high, in other words big, you can get enormous capacity of kilograms of steam per hour. For an example, if you take a look at right now, Kusile, Medupi, and all the power stations, you've got what we call the big banks boilers. And the big banks boilers are vertical boilers. They're water tube boilers. But these boilers are 5 stories high. They're 5 stories high. And there's 6 boilers on Medupi, 6 on Kusile, and there was one other that I do know about, was also 6 boilers. Now, just to see the difference between your boiler and their boiler. Firstly, your boiler works at 1,000 kPa. A vertical boiler works at 9,000 kPa. Musa pressure. Your boiler is 50 tons per hour. One John Banks is 92 tons per hour, 92,000 kilograms. So they are absolutely humongous. They're huge, huge. Instead of one burner on a small boiler, these have got 5 burners, and they're burning into a combustion chamber. This one has got a combustion pipe or a flue or a first pass. Any one of the boilers at Kusile or Madumbe, their combustion chambers is probably from that wall to about here. So that's the size of the room. The height of the room is double the height of this wall, double the height, and it's about this width. So can you imagine this massive chamber? The walls of the chamber are not built of concrete, of reinforced. They're built of pipes, metal pipes that are together, welded together. That is the water going through them. And on the wall, on the one side, there are 5 burners. Each burner, one burner, I can stand inside that rotary cup of that burner, one. And each boiler will have 5 of these burners. And how does it work? This is interesting because we often hear the stories that we get from Eskom. We get from Eskom to say that, for example, the coal quality is poor. Then we'll get